Joining us as all guests do on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, Michael Kaskey-Blomain. Follow him on Twitter at @TheRealMikeKB. Our 97.3 Sixers insider. Also, check out his latest article talking about what TJ McConnell had to say about the Sixers' turnover issues. We'll get into that, as well as the Sixers. They're just a couple games away from clinching their first playoff spot in years. So we'll have Mike on the show now. Mike, how you doing on this supposed to be second day of spring, but it's snowing outside instead?
Yeah, it doesn't look too much like spring out there, Josh, but I'm doing pretty well, man. Thanks for having me on.
So, before we get into your article about TJ McConnell, I want to start with this, and that is, what I think gets lost in a lot of the conversation, the game conversation, the turnover conversation. Brett Brown, Ben Simmons, there's all these topics that are floating out there, but yet to me, it gets overlooked. This team is a few wins away from clinching a playoff spot. This is what we've been waiting for. This is what this team has been working towards, which is making the playoffs. All this conversation about, the tanking and the Embiid injury and Simmons and Fultz, all of this was supposed to be getting this team back to the point of being a playoff team, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. We are in the moment of, the process coming to fruition. And I think, a lot of people, like you said, should probably just kind of take a moment to realize that and really appreciate, how far this team has come in just a matter of a few short years. This was laid out on paper, obviously, by Sam Hinkie and taken over by Colangelo. But to see it starting to actually play out the way that it was, really intended to is, it's pretty exciting to see. And it's, like you said, this is basically what the past few years have been about. And it's only, this is only the beginning, but it's certainly, the team it's coming together quickly, and it's definitely, obviously, an exciting time for the team.
I mean, whether people agreed or disagreed with the process, to me is not the conversation at this point. To me, the conversation at this point, and listen, we all have our things we did and didn't like that happened, whether it's what Colangelo has done, whether Hinkie has said or done. But it's the fact that you don't do all of this just for the sake of doing it. You have an end game, and the end game, whether you do what the Sixers did for multiple years or if you're a team that maybe only does it for a year or two, the whole point is to get your team to be competitive again as soon as possible.
Right. That's a great point, Josh. And it's almost accelerated. I think, at least me personally, I thought that this team would be good this year, obviously much improved. I thought that they would potentially be competing for, a playoff spot, maybe an 8th seed. But, to see where they are at this point in the season, competing for potentially home court advantage in the first round of the playoffs, 9 games over 500 for the first time in 15 years since, right in the prime of Iverson's playing career here with the team, to be, just 2 games back from that 3rd spot where the Cavs are sitting. It's just really impressive. And it's basically just the first full season they've had the players together that Sam put into place. Obviously, it's, Ben's first season, Joel's first season where he's really been, without the heavy restrictions and the injuries that he dealt with last season. It's just really the pace at which it's happened, I think, is pretty impressive. And what's extremely impressive, too, is it's not, this team is set up for success now, and they're set up for sustained success. Like, they have one of the youngest teams in the NBA. They rely on young second-year players more than any other team in the playoff picture right now. So sure, they're good now and they're competitive and they can, make it interesting in this year's playoff push, but they're also set up to be good and improving and better for the next, handful of years at least.
Live right now on 97.3 ESPN.com and also on the 97.3 ESPN mobile app is Michael Kaskey-Blomain's article about the turnovers, what TJ McConnell had to say. And what made it interesting was that McConnell said that it comes from being unselfish. He went on to say that, quote, some of the turnovers are just trying to make the extra pass, and that's the kind of guys we have. And I think that is a very valid point by McConnell because of the fact that Brett Brown always preaches the extra pass, make the extra pass, keep moving the ball. And I think sometimes, yeah, it's frustrating they make the turnovers, but you would rather a team be unselfish because at least if you're being unselfish, you can work on making better passes than having to get a team to pass at all.
Absolutely, Josh. And I kind of touched on that in the article. Like I said, there's no such thing as a good turnover. A coach is never happy to have the ball be turned over and lose a possession. But in the realm of turnovers, I guess the hierarchy of good and bad turnovers, a coach, for just the culture of the team, you would much rather have the turnovers be the result of the players buying into the philosophy of the coach, which, like you said, is an emphasis on passing the ball and moving and playing with the high pace and the pace, and then looking to set up teammates, as opposed to the turnovers being the result of guys trying to make things happen on their own, forcing the action, trying to go one-on-one and getting it stolen or blocked or something like that. Like you said, I mean, this is something that the team obviously needs to work on. They still lead the league in turnovers per game, but it's something, I think Brett has taken with a grain of salt because of that reason, and because it's the result of, like TJ said, these guys are trying to be unselfish, and they'll have a good look, but then they'll try to make a better look, and at that point the defense will be able to recover, and it will lead to a turnover, and that's something they need to work on. But it's not something that's a locker room issue. It's not detrimental to the morale or like the chemistry of the team. It's just a problem that, as Brett pointed to, it's really the result of youth. Young players tend to turn the ball over, and the Sixers rely so heavily on two extremely young players in Ben and Joel to, run basically the entire offense through those two guys. They have the ball in their hands so much, and with the pace of play, the amount of possessions and the amount of passes that the Sixers have each game, they're going to turn the ball over, and Brett has acknowledged this, and he seems, pretty content with that trade-off of, playing the pace and style that he wants compared to the turnovers that they're going to get.
Yeah, see, to me, the problem with the turnovers isn't as much Embiid and Simmons, because first of all, there's a plethora of guys who had more turnovers per game than Simmons their rookie year, and that list includes Allen Iverson, Isaiah Thomas, Magic Johnson. So, and even LeBron had the same number of turnovers per game, basically, that Ben Simmons had. So, to me, Ben Simmons, the turnovers isn't as much the issue. To me, the turnover issue comes down to two things. One, I think Embiid, he needs to, his basketball IQ is still developing. He needs to be more aware of where he's passing the ball sometimes, because he's not a ball handler. So, as a not ball handler, a lot of his work is coming out of the double teams, coming out of maybe a high screen and roll kind of situation. So part of it has to do with him learning the game still. But the flip side that frustrates me about the turnovers, Mike, is the fact that you saw the game that J.J. Redick had 5 turnovers. When Ilyasova or Bellinelli have turnovers. When guys who are veterans have turnovers, that exasperates me, because the whole point of them being here is that they know the game. They're experienced in the league. And when they make turnovers, to me, that is what frustrates me the most, because I expect it from Embiid. I expect it from Simmons. I expect it from the younger guys to make mistakes. I don't need my veterans making mistakes as well.
Yeah, you're 100% right, Josh. It's definitely infinitely more frustrating watching a game when you see, JJ forcing a turnover by trying to do too much, or Irsan. That's a great point. Like you said, they're brought here for the veteran leadership to not, have these turnovers. And the young guys, like you said, are expected to have turnovers, especially when, they're going to have the ball in their hands as much as Ben. Some of it is obviously schematic, and Brett has said that, putting guys in the proper positions. And some of it is just a matter of, I think, guys trying to, maybe go outside of themselves, especially JJ. I think a lot of the times he ends up turning the ball over. It's him putting the ball on the ground or trying to, make a pass that's not necessarily there when technically he's there to, really space the floor and keep the defense honest. So it's mainly just guys that really need to stay, I think, within their role as far as the veterans, to kind of cut down on those turnovers. And the team, for what it's worth, they have been, improving in that area over the past few months, which is something that Brett has pointed to. He was talking about that specifically after the win over the Hornets on Monday night. They've gone down each month this year in the turnovers per game. I think this month in March, they're down to like 21st in the NBA from, dead last in January. They're down to 14.6 a game from 16.7. So it is something that's improving. I think Joel is getting a little bit better. Like you mentioned, he's getting a little bit better at picking his spots, reading a defense, learning how to, react quicker to a double team and passing over or out of that. he obviously still, needs to get a little bit better coming out of the pick and rolls from the top when he, puts the ball on the floor. I think more often than not, that ends up being a problem. And that's something that I think will just come with time and experience too. So like you said, I'm not really concerned about either of those guys moving forward. It's just a matter of, some of the other guys cutting down the mental mistakes really moving forward into the playoffs.
You mentioned Brett Brown and scheme and schematics. What do you think Brett Brown can do better schematically? Because I do feel like, as you were saying, some of these turnovers have to do with where some of these guys are being placed on the offense. But I also feel like some of these turnover issues, but also the offensive efficiency. You mentioned in the article how the Sixers average the most passes per game of any team in the league. So if you're throwing this many passes and you're a team that is this dependent on the extra pass as a major part of your offense, what are some of the ways that Brett Brown can himself do a better job as schematically putting this team in a better position?
That's definitely something that he's obviously been trying to figure out himself with the turnovers. He's certainly heard the cries from the fans about the turnovers throughout the season. I think a lot of it really has to do with now that he has a solid rotation that he has to work with, that he's clearly kind of paring down the lineup moving into the postseason. I think it's just a matter of really setting up the offense to run through Joel in the post, getting the guys to really operate off through that. And, because like you said, the extra pass is such a part of their offense. They don't have the one-on-one players that some of the other teams in the playoff picture do, where you would go look at like an isolated guy in a mismatch. The Sixers really, generate so much of the offense off the pass, so they're not really going to, alter that approach. A lot of people I've seen suggest, like, why does Brett emphasize so much that style of play when you could cut down the passes and then cut down the turnovers? Doing that would obviously really alter basically the scheme and the approach of the team. There's only like so much you could do, at this point. But I think a lot of it really what he's going to try to do at least is try to get Joel in the post, when he's in there, work through there, really get the guys to space the floor, and then let Ben, kind of just pick his spots. I think Ben's growth as a point guard throughout the season has been really big for the team. His IQ, really, I think it culminated on Monday with, had 15 assists, 0 turnovers against the Hornets, which was, an extremely impressive performance for a guy that's just been getting better at taking care of the ball. So I think it's just small things, making sure that Irsan doesn't, limiting the possessions that, maybe you put a guy like Irsan in a situation where he's a ball handler in a pick and roll would leave, potential for a turnover, things like that. But overall, I think Brett, at least for now, seems pretty content with the scheme, and it's more just a matter of eliminating, TJ called them bonehead plays. Brett called them, lapses of judgment, I think is what he likes to refer to them as. And it's just something that I think the team will really need to cut down. And like we said, they kind of have been at least trending in the right direction in that area.
Talk with Michael Kaskey-Blomain, our 97.3 ESPN.com Sixers insider, joining us today on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. You can follow him on Twitter at @TheRealMikeKB. Mike, this just coming down from the Sixers PR. So per NBA stats, due to a stat change, Joel Embiid now officially had 25 points and 20 rebounds, not 19, in Monday's win over the Hornets. That means he's the first Sixer to have a 20-20 game since Samuel Dalembert had one in 2010. So add that to Embiid's resume of what he has done this year. In your eyes, what is the biggest thing about Embiid that has gotten better this year from the beginning of the season to now as we go down the stretch heading into the postseason?
I think physically, just his conditioning level is huge. You can definitely see he's not near where he could be or where he really will be at his peak. But I think he's just more comfortable playing longer minutes. He's more comfortable with his body. This is obviously the first year that he kind of got the bubble wrap off him. They able to play back to backs. He's averaging about 32 a night, which is up over 6 minutes more a game than he was playing last year. He's playing. Really not missing games, especially since the All-Star break. He's been banged up. He's been hitting the floor, but he's been, bouncing back up, playing in games. So I think just him getting, getting his basketball legs and his wind under him has been huge. And then coming with that is something kind of that we just touched on. It's his IQ. I think, obviously the more you play in the league, the better you get just by seeing things and experiencing things. I think we're starting to see his IQ maybe catch up to his skill set a bit in terms of, how he's being able to read the defense, pick apart matchups, exploit certain weaknesses in defenders that he's seen before. I think all of that it's just starting to come together, and it's only he's only really starting to scratch the surface of his potential. And then more, statistically, he's made a big jump as far as as a rebounder this year. You just said, obviously, he had 20 on Monday night. He had 19 the game before that against the Nets. So, he's fifth in the league overall, I believe, in rebounds per game this season. I know he's, top 7, fifth or sixth. So he's really, I think, made it a priority and a focus of his to hit the glass, based off how big he is. There's very few guys in the league that could, even contend with him for a rebound if they wanted to. And he's, as they say, rebounding, a lot of it is effort and desire. So you combined, a determined Joel with his body type on the glass. There's very few guys that would be able to, compete with him in terms of being a dominant rebounder. And I think he's taken a really solid step toward that this season. So really all of that together, we're just starting to see, this was his first all-star season in a career that could potentially be, multiple all-star appearances.
We know that the playoffs are around the corner. The playoffs are different. It's a different world. The lights are different. The environment's different. The feel is different. So for the Sixers, to me, I look at them heading to the playoffs and I say them making it to the second round is very much dependent on the matchup. Like, for example, I look at teams like the Pacers and the Wizards, and I think the Sixers could definitely beat them in a 7-game series because I think, one, who's going to guard Simmons is always a question that has to be asked with a lot of these teams. And with Embiid, there's nobody on the Wizards who's going to stop or slow down Embiid. At least the Pacers have Miles Turner, but even he has his limitations. But to me, both of those teams are more regular season teams than postseason teams. Whereas I look at other teams, the top three are still the Cavs, the Celtics, and the Raptors. I think the Sixers have much more trouble with those three than they would if they were to match up with the Pacers or the Wizards.
Josh, I definitely agree. I certainly agree. It's based on, how they would be able to do it would be based on matchup. The way I see it, there's two teams that I think I would, at this point, I think that they would have real trouble with. You just mentioned, the Raptors and the Cavs. Obviously, the Raptors have, been playing excellent basketball all season, and they're a team that just has experience. Their core has been together for years. They have veterans. They have the playoff experience. They've been deep into the postseason with the same players multiple years in a row. And then with the Cavs, obviously, LeBron James is still the best player in the league. He has weapons around him. They're not necessarily as good or as dangerous as they've been in recent years, but he's still at the top of his game, and they still have, similar to Toronto, they have that experience. They've obviously been to 3 straight finals. Tristan Thompson is still there, JR, Kevin Love, LeBron. A lot of the core guys that have been around are still there. So it's only realistic that you would expect the Sixers, a Sixers team with players, none of which other than JJ have playoff experience really, to struggle with teams like that. But outside of those two teams, there's really not a team in the East that going into a 7-game series with that I don't think the Sixers could at least compete against. Boston, if they were full health, and if they are at full health, then they will certainly be a handful. But, they're really banged up right now, missing Kyrie, Marcus Smart, Daniel Steves, Jaylen Brown. They're all out right now. So depending on the health of Boston, they could definitely be a tough matchup. But if the Sixers caught Boston, as they are right now, depleted, I think they would have a great chance. And again, it would be tough. I don't think it would be a guaranteed victory for any series that the Sixers would play in the East, whether it would be the Wizards, Pacers, whoever it would be, but they would have, I think, a solid chance against any of those teams other than the Raptors or Cavs, really just based off the experience factor.
You can follow him on Twitter at The Real Mike KB, The Real Mike KB on Twitter. And check out his article right now on 973ESPN.com and also on the 973 ESPN mobile app. The article is TJ McConnell blames Sixers turnovers on unselfishness. Great job with the article, Mike, and appreciate the time as always. Keep up the great work, and if you're able to get to the Sixers game, take a picture and put it on Twitter so we can verify that you're actually there.
Will do, Josh. I'm about to break out my skis, I think, to get out there.
Well, we know Jay. We always saw the picture online. Jared Bayless is there. So if nothing else, Jared is there in the house tonight.
There we go. Thanks for having me on, Josh.